My grandfather built this farm with his bare hands back in 1954. Folks these days don't understand what that means. He didn't have fancy tools, didn't have a bank loan, and sure as hell didn't have any HOA breathing down his neck. He carved a living out of the dirt because he believed in two things: hard work and family. I grew up on that land, running through the fields, chasing fireflies at dusk, and listening to Grandpa talk about how land is freedom. He used to say, they can take your money, boy, but they can't take the ground beneath your feet if you know how to hold it. Turns out he was wrong about that last part. I never thought I'd be the one to watch strangers try to rip away what 3 generations of my family built. But that's what happened, starting with one letter. It came in a plain white envelope. No return address, just a bold header that read, "Mandatory notice from the Lakewood Estates Homeowners Association." I almost laughed when I saw it. HOA, out here. I live on the edge of a sleepy rural town near a Starbucks is 20 miles away. But over the last decade, developers started buying up parcels, building these cookie-cutter houses with gray siding and tiny yards, and with them came rules. And KARENS. Now, don't get me wrong, I've got nothing against folks wanting a nice place to live, but I stayed out here on purpose. Wide fields, barns that creak in the wind, and a sky so big it could fall into it. That's what freedom feels like. So, when I opened that letter and read their welcome notice, my blood ran cold. According to the HOA, my grandfather's old farmhouse and the 80 acres around it were now considered part of Lakewood Estates Community Zone A. They wrote that like it was some kind of honor, but I knew what it meant. Rules, fees, control. The letter listed a bunch of ridiculous regulations: no livestock outside after 7 p.m., mandatory paint colors for all residential structures, and a ban on any fences not aesthetically consistent with neighborhood design standards. I laughed out loud. My nearest neighbor is a mile away, and the only design standard out here is whether your barn door closes before the next thunderstorm. I tossed the letter on the kitchen table and went about my day. A week later, the fine started. First, it was a $200 non-compliance notice because my barn built by my grandfather wasn't painted neutral taupe. Then $500 for having unauthorized livestock because my cattle weren't on an approved list. The cherry on top, a $1,000 penalty for non-approved perimeter fencing. I'd had that fence since I was a kid. It's practically a family heirloom. At first, I thought it was a scam. No way a bunch of suburban busybodies had any legal authority over my farm. So, I called the number on the letter. That's when I met her. Karen. You know the type. Before I even describe her voice, sharp as a cactus spine. Talking slow like you're the dumbest person in the county, Mr. Walker, she said. We have tried to be patient, but compliance with community standards is not optional. Community, I said. Lady, the only community I belong to is the Walker family. And last I checked, our bylaws don't say a damn thing about painting barns beige. She made this little sigh, the kind people make when they think they're smarter than you. You signed the agreement when you inherited the property. What agreement? The Lakewood Estates covenant, conditions, and restrictions. Your parcel is within the boundaries. It's binding. I hung up before I said something that'd get me arrested. For the next month, the letters came like clockwork, fines piled up higher than hay in the loft. Every time I saw that HOA logo, I felt my grandfather rolling in his grave. I figured I'd ignore them until they got bored. That was mistake number 1. CHOS. Don't get bored, they get mean. First, they slapped a lien on my property. That's when I knew it was serious. Then the sheriff's deputy showed up at my door with a court order taped to my gate. The HOA wasn't just fining me anymore, they were suing me for $37,000 in unpaid fees and damages to community aesthetics. I couldn't believe it. I called a lawyer, but after looking at the covenant they claimed I was bound by, he shook his head. They might actually have you, he said. Developers sold them rights to enforce community standards when the land got rezoned years back. It's ugly. I didn't sleep that night. Walked the property line with a flashlight, thinking about all the memories tied to that soil. My grandfather's boot prints were still in the concrete of the old milking shed, and now some HOA wanted to tell me how to live on it. The next day, Karen called again. This time, her voice was dripping with fake sweetness. Mr. Walker, the board has reviewed your case. We're willing to settle if you agree to a special assessment to bring your property into compliance. How much? I asked, even though I didn't want to know. She cleared her throat. $310,000. I thought I misheard her. Say that again. $310,000, she repeated. It covers landscaping, structural upgrades, and amenity contributions. We're being generous. Most owners would kill for what you have. The board has big plans for Lakewood Estates. I stared out at my grandfather's fields, golden in the late summer sun. $310,000 for the privilege of keeping my own land. And then Karen said something that chilled me to the bone. It's better you pay now, Mr. Walker, she purred, because if you don't, well, we already have buyers interested in developing your section. It's just business. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about rules. This was a land grab. I hung up without a word, but my hands were shaking. For the first time in my life, I felt powerless on my own land. but not for long. Because that night I made myself a promise. If they wanted a fight, they were about to get one. I didn't sleep much after Karen dropped that number on me, $310,000. It echoed in my head like a bad joke that wasn't funny. My grandfather used to say, land is the one thing they can't make more of. You hold it, you protect it, you never let anyone take it from you. While Grandpa never met an HOA with a lawyer and a thirst for other people's dirt. The next morning, I drove into town, still shaking mad. I stopped by Earl's Diner Place, hasn't changed since the 70s, except the prices, and slid into my usual booth by the window. Earl himself poured me a coffee, black as sin. "Morning, Walker," he said. "You look like someone shot your dog." I told him about the letter, the fines, and Karen's little phone call. He spat in the sink like he'd just tasted vinegar. "HOA out here. Hell, next thing you know they'll be telling us how tall our corn can grow." "You talk to a lawyer?" "Yeah," I said. "He says they might actually have me." Earl shook his head. "City folks come out here. They think they own the place. Be careful, son." That stuck with me all the way home. 2 days later, things got worse. I was mending a section of fence when I heard tires crunching on the gravel drive. A white SUV rolled up, spotless like it just came out of a showroom. The window slid down, and there she was, Karen in the flesh. Blonde bob haircut, sunglasses big enough to start their own eclipse, lips pursed like she'd smelled something rotten. "Mr. Walker," she said, stepping out like she owned the dirt under her heels. "We need to talk." I leaned on the fence post, wiping sweat from my brow. "You're braver than I thought, coming out here." She smiled like a cat that had cornered a mouse. "I prefer face-to-face discussions. The board's concerned about your reluctance to cooperate." "Reluctance?" I laughed. "Lady, you're asking me to pay a small fortune to follow rules I never agreed to." Karen tilted her head. "It's not a request, it's an obligation. And frankly, your property is underdeveloped. It's an eyesore compared to the rest. With the community, we're trying to elevate values." I took a long look at her designer shoes sinking in the dirt, manicured nails gripping a clipboard like it was a lifeline. And I realized something. Karen didn't care about rules. She cared about money, and she thought she smelled blood. "It's not going to happen," I said. "This land's been in my family for 70 years. It stays the way it is." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes turned cold. "Then I hope you enjoy legal proceedings. Because as of today, you're officially in violation of Section 12, failure to comply with special assessments." She slid a paper out of her folder and held it like a dealer showing an ace. I didn't take it. Karen shrugged, tucked it back, and turned to leave. But before she got in her SUV, she said something that froze me to the bone. "You know, Mr. Walker, progress waits for no one. If you're smart, you'll take the settlement. Otherwise..." She looked out over my fields like they already belonged to her. "Someone else will." Then she drove off, leaving a cloud of dust and a knot in my gut. I wish I could tell you I stayed calm. Truth is, I was rattled. That night I pulled out every scrap of paperwork I had: deeds, tax bills, even old letters from the county. And that's when I saw something I'd missed before. A rezoning notice from 10 years ago. Back when developers started moving in, the county had reclassified my land as mixed residential, but Grandpa never mentioned it. Probably never understood what it meant. Turns out, it meant the HOA could claim jurisdiction over my property if the developer's covenant covered my parcel. And guess what? It did. Some slick lawyer had tied it all together in fine print no farmer would ever read. By the time the sun came up, I had a headache and a stack of bad news. Then the deputy showed up. I heard the knock on the door just as I poured my first cup of coffee. Sheriff's deputy, standing on my porch with a face like stone and a manila envelope in his hand. "Morning, Walker," he said. "Got some paperwork for you." I opened it. My stomach dropped. "Notice of foreclosure proceedings. They're moving fast." I muttered. "HOAs usually do," the deputy said, almost apologetic. "Sorry, Walker, I know what this place means to you." When his cruiser pulled away, I sank into a chair and stared out the window at my field's golden waves stretching to the tree line. This land raised me. It raised my father. And now a bunch of clipboard cowboys wanted to carve it up for profit. That night, I walked out to the old barn. The boards creaked like they were whispering secrets. I ran my hand along the wall where Grandpa carved his initials back in '62. My chest ached. I wasn't just losing dirt, I was losing history. Sweat, blood, memories. That's when I made a decision. If they wanted war, I'd give them one. First step was calling an old buddy of mine, Charlie Givens. Used to be a hell of a lawyer before. He retired. These days, he mostly fishes and yells at the TV. But when he picked up the phone and heard the tremble in my voice, he said, "Don't move a muscle. I'm coming over." Charlie showed up the next morning with a briefcase older than Karen's HOA. We spread the papers on my kitchen table. He read every line, muttering curses that would make a preacher faint. Finally, he looked up. "Walker, they've got you in a corner. That covenant was written by a shark, but..." He paused, tapping a finger on one paragraph. "There might be a crack in the wall." I leaned in. "What kind of crack?" Charlie grinned. "The kind that can bring the whole damn house down, but we need proof and time." Proof of what? I asked. He slid a photo across the table. It was an aerial shot of the development rows of houses, a man-made lake, tennis courts gleaming in the sun. You see this, he said. Half these amenities aren't on land the HOA owns, and if my hunch is right, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. My pulse quickened like a horse hearing the dinner bell. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't felt since this nightmare started. Hope, but that hope didn't last long, because 2 days later I drove past the far edge of my property and saw something that made my blood boil. Heavy equipment, bulldozers, cement trucks, and a big sign that read, "Future site of Lakewood Luxury Retreat, private resort for residents only." On my land I slammed the brakes so hard the truck fishtailed. Sat there gripping the wheel, heart pounding like a drum. They weren't just threatening to take my land, they were already building on it. That's when I knew this wasn't just a fight, this was war. You ever have one of those moments where the world just tilts sideways? Like reality slaps you so hard you can't breathe. That was me, sitting in my truck staring at a construction site sprouting like weeds on my grandfather's land. I climbed out, boots crunching gravel, and stormed toward the nearest hardit I could find. Some kid, maybe mid-20s, chewing gum like he didn't have a care in the world. "Hey," I barked, "what the hell are you doing on my property?" He blinked, then smirked like he'd heard this before. "This is Lakewood Development. Land, sir, resort's going up. Gonna have a pool, fitness center, the works." My fists clenched so hard my nails dug into my palms. "This ain't Lakewood land, this is Walker land." He shrugged. "Not what the plans say." Then he turned and yelled, "Hey Karen. Guy says it's his property." And that's when I saw her striding across the dirt in heels, clipboard in hand, wearing a neon vest like she was queen of the construction site. "Karen, Mr. Walker," she said, smiling like a rattlesnake. "Glad you stopped by, isn't it exciting? This resort is going to elevate the community experience. You should be proud your property is contributing to something so aspirational." Aspirational? My voice was a growl. "You mean illegal?" Karen's smile didn't budge. "The board authorized the development. You failed to comply, so we're moving forward. You'll be compensated fairly once we finalize the seizure." Seizure? I spat the word like it tasted bad. She nodded, slow and smug. "We filed for eminent domain. Technically, we're a special district authority under county law, perfectly legal. Our attorney assures us the judge will sign off." Stared at her, barely breathing. Eminent domain, one of the dirtiest tricks in the book. That's when I realized just how far they'd go. They weren't bluffing. They were stealing my land one bulldozer at a time. I turned without another word, because if I stayed, I'd probably end up in jail for assault. Back at the farmhouse, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and called Charlie. Told him everything. "Eminent domain," he said, voice sharp. "Those snakes are overreaching. HOA ain't a government entity, they're bluffing. But they're counting on you not fighting back." "Well, I'm damn sure fighting back," I growled. "Tell me you found something." Charlie hesitated just long enough to make me nervous. "I did. And it's big. But we need hard evidence. Their expansion isn't legal unless the resort's footprint is within the original HOA development zone. I checked the maps, the line cuts right through your land. Half their resort is outside their jurisdiction." "You're saying?" "I'm saying if we can prove they're building outside their authority, it's game over. And if we dig deeper, we might find fraud. But we need copies of their site plans, permits, the whole 9 yards. That means getting our hands dirty." I looked out at the dark fields, the moon painting silver streaks over the crops. My jaw tightened. "Then, let's get dirty." That was the night I broke the law for the first time in my life. Charlie and I rolled up to the HOA office after midnight, a fancy little clubhouse at the edge of the new development. Windows dark, security light buzzing like an angry hornet. Charlie popped the lock like it was nothing. "Don't ask," he muttered inside. It smelled like new carpet and cheap power. We found the boardroom, big mahogany table, wall full of plaques bragging about community excellence. I wanted to smash every one. Charlie rifled through file cabinets while I stood watch. Finally, he yanked out a folder thick as a phone book and grinned. "Got it. Site plans, budget reports, even emails. Let's move." We slipped out without a sound, hearts pounding like teenagers after curfew. Back at my kitchen table, we spread the papers out. What we saw made my blood run cold. They weren't just building a resort, they were planning Lakewood Phase 3, a luxury subdivision that swallowed half my farm. And the kicker, the signatures approving those plans were forged. Charlie tapped the paper. "See this? They needed unanimous board consent to greenlight the resort. 2 signatures are fake. If we take this to the county prosecutor, it's felony fraud." I felt a slow, fierce grin spread across my face for the first time in weeks. "Karen," I whispered, "you just dug your own grave." The next morning I called Karen.com as Stillwater. "Mr. Walker," she said, syrupy. "Sweet, have you reconsidered our offer?" "Sure have," I said, "and I've got an offer for you. Call off your little resort, remove every stick of equipment from my land, and drop every lien you've filed, or the DA gets a nice fat folder with your name all over it." Silence, then a sharp laugh. "You think you can scare me with empty threats?" "Not empty," I said. Want me to read you the email where you approved Phase 3 under a forged vote, or should I just let Channel 7 run it tonight? That wiped the smile off her voice. You wouldn't. Try me. She hung up without another word. Charlie grinned across the table. That'll rattle her cage. But an hour later, I realized we'd kicked a hornet's nest, because that's when the black SUV pulled up outside my house and 3 men in suits stepped out. Those 3 men in suits didn't look like your average HOA board members. They looked like the kind of guys who solve problems with fists instead of bylaws. I stepped onto the porch, heart hammering, shotgun resting casually in the crook of my arm, not pointing at, just reminding them I was a man raised where self is a birthright. Can I help you, gentlemen? I said, voice calm as a frozen lake. The tallest one, shaved head, sunglasses, said, you Walker. Depends who's asking. He flashed a business card I didn't bother to read. Representatives of Lakewood Development. We need to discuss your obstruction of progress. Funny, I said. I was about to say the same to you. The second guy, square jaw and a neck like a tree trunk, stepped forward. You made some serious accusations against the HOA president. That's defamation. Walker could cost you everything. I smiled slow. That's so, because I got a folder full of proof that says otherwise, and copies in 3 different places, in case somebody gets the bright idea to make me disappear. For the first time, I saw the flicker in his eyes. He knew I wasn't bluffing. The tall one leaned in close, voice low and oily. Listen, old man, you don't understand who you're messing with. There's a lot of money tied up in this project. People who don't like losing. Neither do I said. Then I cocked the shotgun. Click, conversation's over. They left, but not before tossing one last threat over their shoulder. You'll regret this. That night I didn't sleep. Every creak in the old farmhouse felt like a footstep on the porch. Every coyote howl made me check the locks twice. By morning, things got worse. I went to feed the cattle and found the north fence cut clean through, tracks in the mud where something heavy rolled in during the night. One of my steers gone. It wasn't about the cow. It was a message. Charlie showed up an hour later with coffee and a face like thunder. They're trying to scare you, he said. Classic intimidation tactic. Don't bite. Oh, I'm not biting, I said. Eyes hard as nails. I'm going for the throat. Charlie had been digging deeper, and what he found was dirtier than a hog pen after a rainstorm. Turns out Karen had more skeletons than a Halloween aisle. Kickbacks from contractors. Personal vacations, builders, community development. Even a sweetheart deal on that neon green Tesla she drove. We take this to the DA today, Charlie said, slapping a stack of papers on the table. By next week, Carn'll be trading that Tesla for a bus pass. But just as hope bloomed, the phone rang. It was Karen. Her voice was ice. Mr. Walker, you've made this personal. You want to play hardball? Fine, I'll play harder. As of this morning, the board voted unanimously to accelerate foreclosure in 72 hours. That property isn't yours anymore. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Funny thing about unanimous votes, Karen. Hard to pull off when half your signatures are fake. Silence. Then the click of a dead line. Charlie grinned. You just put the fear of God in her. I wasn't so sure, because that night, the real war started. I woke to sirens and flashing lights painting the fields red and blue. Stumbled outside to find the barn engulfed in flames. Fire roaring like the devil himself was taking up residence. Neighbors came running, trying to form a bucket line, but it was useless. By the time the fire trucks rolled up, all that was left was a blackened skeleton and the smell of history burning. I stood there, fists trembling, smoke stinging my eyes, not just from the fire. That barn had stood for 3 generations. Grandpa's initials were on those walls. And now it was ash. Deputy Mark pulled me aside. Walker, this was no accident. Accelerant everywhere. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. I didn't need him to say who. I knew. Karen had declared war, and that's when something inside me snapped clean in two. Next morning, I called an emergency meeting at Earl's Diner, told every old-timer, every neighbor who'd ever shaken my hand, exactly what Karen was doing, just to me, but to the whole community. She burns my barn today, I said, voice like gravel. Tomorrow it's your pasture, your pond, your family land. She wants it all. Murmurs turn to growls. Folks out here might bicker over fence lines, but we circle wagons when an outsider tries to take what's ours. By the time I left that diner, I had 20 neighbors ready to fight legally and otherwise. Charlie filed the fraud case that afternoon. The DA's office opened an investigation. Things were moving fast, too fast for Karen, because that night, I got a text from an unknown number. Just 6 words that made my blood run cold. Check the far field. Bring a shovel. I grabbed a flashlight and drove out under a sky black as sin. Parked by the old oak tree and started walking, boots sinking into soft earth. And then I saw it, fresh dirt piled high, like a grave. Heart pounding. I dropped to my knees and started digging. 10 minutes later, my shovel hit something solid. I pulled it up, brushed off the dirt, and froze. It was a piece of wood, charred with Grandpa's initials burned into it. They hadn't just burned my barn, they'd dug up the foundation. Why? That's when the beam of a flashlight hit me from behind, and a voice I knew all too well said, "Thought you'd be smarter than this, Walker." I turned and there she was, Karen with 2 men behind her, and in her hand a gun. That gun looked like a black hole, sucking the breath right out of me. Karen stood there, heels sinking into the dirt, her perfect hair wild in the night wind. Behind her, those 2 suits flanked her like dogs waiting for the command. "Well," she said, voice smooth as poison, "looks like we got ourselves a little problem, Mr. Walker." "Yeah," I said slowly, hands raised, flashlight dangling. "That looks that way. You just couldn't let it go, could you?" Her lip curled. "All you had to do was take the offer. Retire somewhere sunny. But no, you had to dig. Now you're standing on a crime scene." I let out a short, sharp laugh. "Funny thing, Karen, when you say crime scene, you mean your crime scene, right? Fraud, arson, forgery, not to mention whatever this little stunt is." Her eyes narrowed. "You think anyone's gonna believe you? You're a bitter old man. I'm the president of a respected HOA. Your word against mine." "Not exactly," I said, and I tilted my head toward the dark. That's when the headlights came onto trucks. Brights blazing, engines growling like hounds. Karen spun around as half a dozen of my neighbors stepped out. Phones held high, cameras rolling. Earl was in front, shotgun across his shoulder like he'd been born with it. "Evening, Karen," Earl drawled. "Gotta say, that's a real bold move, pulling a gun on a man in front of witnesses. Hope you put on your best smile. This video's going viral." Karen's face drained of color. Her hand shook just enough to give her away. "Drop it," Earl said, calm as Sunday morning, "before you add aggravated assault to that rap sheet." For a second I thought she might actually do something stupid. Then her arm sagged, and the gun hit the dirt with a dull thud. I stepped forward, voice like iron. "It's over, Karen." The sheriff showed up 20 minutes later, blue lights painting the night. He cuffed Karen himself, reading her rights, while the neighbors watched. The suits didn't fare much better, turns out. They had warrants in 3 states for consulting. Figures, but the real hammer dropped 2 weeks later when the DA filed charges. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit arson, attempted coercion. Karen went from queen bee to inmate faster than a hot knife through butter. As for the HOA, the county dissolved the board pending investigation. Lakewood's big fancy resort, dead in the water. Half-built skeleton standing like a monument to greed. And my land, mine again, every inch of it. The day I rebuilt that barn, I carved Grandpa's initials into the first beam, took my time, steady hand, like I was writing a prayer. Charlie stood beside me, grinning ear to ear. "You realize," he said, "you could sue for damages. Karen's insurance, the HOA's assets, you could retire filthy rich." I just smiled. Don't need their money. All I ever wanted was this. I looked out at the fields, golden in the late afternoon sun. This land, this sky. Grandpa gave me roots. Not for sale. Not now. Not ever. Charlie chuckled. "Damn, Walker. If you don't run for county commissioner, I'm voting for you anyway." We laughed until our sides hurt, the way men do when the storm's finally passed, you know. Folks ask me sometimes if I regret it, if I wish I'd just signed the papers and walked away. And I tell them this: you can't put a price on home. Not in dollars, not in threats, not in all the fancy promises of progress. Some things are worth fighting for, and if you ever forget that, you've already lost. So here's to you, Grandpa. We kept it safe. And to Karen, wherever you are, hope you like your new HOA. Bet the prison yard's got a real strict set of rules. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around. I've got more wild HOA tales coming your way.